So if you've been taking a look at the news lately, there's pretty much three things vanishing off the American landscape, quicker than endangered species during the Trump presidency. And that would be Confederate flags, all the equity gained by the middle class in the last decade, and Confederate monuments. Now, two of these three things I am completely not upset about. Um, I've been told by numerous people on the right that the left really enjoys and loves their participation trophies, uh, which is hilarious to me because these are the same people who tell me that Confederate statues are about heritage and not hate. I can't believe we literally spent 100 years building all these statues to a bunch of people who came in second place at something. Um, I don't recall anybody building a statue of Hillary Clinton after she came in second place to Donald Trump. I don't remember anybody building a statue to Mitt Romney when he came in second place to Barack Obama. And I have no idea who the hell lost to Michael Phelps all those times in the last Olympic Games, but I'm pretty sure nobody built a statue for him either. Um, Now, if I told you just how many Confederate statues we have in America, and the real reason why they were built, um, I don't know. This might all make a little more sense to you. Lucky for you, we're going to take a look at that. Yeah, I got you covered. Don't worry about it. All right, here we go. Mapping hundreds of Confederate statues across the U.S. It's been more than 150 years since the end of the 4-year American Civil War that claimed more than 600,000 lives. The Confederate States of America, also known as the Confederacy, was a group of 11 southern states that seceded from the Union in 1860. These states, in order of their secession, were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. These states wanted to preserve the institution of slavery, which they largely depended on to build their economies. In the end, the Confederacy was defeated and slavery was abolished. Now, across the United States, there are an estimated 1,741 public symbols of the Confederacy, and these symbols include schools, parks, bridges, roads, statues, and more. Although many Americans recognize the immortality of historic colonialists, slave owners, and anti-abolitionists, some say these symbols should be preserved as a reminder of the country's past. Since Heather Heyer was killed in Charlottesville in 2017, at least 44 monuments have been removed across the country. Here is a map of where all the Confederate statues in the United States are, and primarily what we're going to focus on here. Now, you would think that after the Civil War, if people wanted to, people in specific states that were part of the Confederacy wanted to honor their people, they would have gone out and built some statues after the Civil War. Oddly enough, most of the statues not built right after the Civil War. I wonder why. Okay, actually, I don't wonder why, because I've already read this article and went to college and read books and know things. But let's just assume, y'all went to, public high school and they never actually taught you about this stuff because, God forbid we explain how white supremacy continues to, maintain a stranglehold on American culture, 150 years after the Civil War. That would be horrible. So, there's a whole lot of statues that have been getting taken down, mostly by protesters. Some by cities because they're afraid protesters are going to rip them down. And a lot of the named stuff, roads, bridges, that sort of thing. People have been fighting for decades to get those changed, and slowly, one by one, they come off the board, but it takes a long time. So where did we get all these Confederate monuments from? I mean, there's a lot of them. You can't miss them. They're pretty much giant bronze statues of white dudes on horses that are now all spray painted with Black Lives Matter. Now most of these monuments didn't actually go up immediately after the Civil War's end in 1865. During that time, commemorative markers of the Civil War tended to be memorials that mourned soldiers who had died. You know, because that's what statues and monuments are supposed to be for, to honor the dead. However, that's not why we built them. Eventually, they started to build Confederate monuments. The vast majority of them were built between 1890 and 1950, which matches up exactly with the era of Jim Crow segregation. Stunner, right? Go ahead. Tell me you're all stunned. And the biggest spike of them being built was between 1900 and the 1920s. You know, also during the same time that women were trying to get the right to vote. So essentially, the largest spike of statues that were put up as a monument to old white dudes was during the time when black people were free, but ultimately suppressed, and all women were still property. Once again, another stunner. I'm sure you're all shocked by this, right? In contrast to earlier memorials that mourned dead soldiers, these monuments tended to glorify leaders of the Confederacy, like General Robert E. Lee, the former president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, and General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. You know, all those people who came in second place. Yeah, the losers. You know, all I keep hearing about is that in America, we're number one, we're number one, we're number one. Yet we've erected, 700-800 statues to a bunch of losers. So apparently it's not because it's, a sign of our culture or our history. No. That's not what it's there for here. All of those monuments were there to teach values to people. That's why they put them in city squares. That's why they put them in front of state buildings. Many earlier memorials had instead been placed in cemeteries. The values these monuments stood for, he says, includes a glorification of the cause of civil war. Oddly enough, white women were instrumental in raising funds to build these Confederate monuments. The United Daughters of the Confederacy, founded in the 1890s, was probably the most important and influential group. Yes, Southern women, or the ones who, had very few rights, were the ones who wanted the most to memorialize statues to people who held that black people should have no rights. I can't make this crap up, people, I promise. It's all here. This isn't me. This is literally the History Channel's website. In fact, the group was responsible for creating what is basically a Mount Rushmore of the Confederacy, a gigantic stone carving of Davis, Lee, and Jackson in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which was completed in the 1960s. Just before people of color were actually got the Civil Rights Amendment. Yeah. Then. By then, the construction of the new Confederate monuments had begun to taper off, but the backlash to the Civil Rights Movement was spreading. Confederate symbols in other ways. In 1956, Georgia redesigned its state flag to include the Confederate battle flag, and in 1962, South Carolina placed the flag atop its Capitol building. In a 2016 report, they said more than 700 monuments were part of roughly 1,500 symbols of the Confederacy in public spaces. Protesters and city officials have gradually taken down statues in multiple towns and cities, with at least 138 being removed since 2015. Now again, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that America is a country whose current culture is totally based on being the alpha male, on being number one, on being the winner. Just listen to the head of the current regime, Donald Trump. I mean, he'll tell you, American greatness is all that matters. And yet, for some reason, there is a wide swath of people, especially over on the right in the conservative wing of society and the government, who are staunchly opposed to removing all of these statues to losers that were put up at a time when white fragility was at an all-time high. We are a bloody shambles, people. So I'm going to leave you with one little fun note. And it's a reminder that anytime you're sad about how things are going in the world, you can always turn to the internet, because on the internet, somebody is taking something good and making it great. Twitter reminds us of the many things that lasted longer than the Confederacy. Remember when I told you the Civil War was only 4 years long? The Confederacy itself was not alive much longer than that. And it seems like an extremely brief amount of time in American history to have so many statues and memorials dedicated to it. I mean, 4 years. That's a small amount of time. So let's take a look. So the Confederacy was alive for a total of 5 years, which honestly is nothing to be that proud of. So Twitter is taking some time now to highlight all of the things that lasted longer than the defeated nation that tried to secede because they wanted to own slaves. And here you go. Just a reminder that the Confederacy only existed for 5 years. It's not Ireland, where centuries of ancestors lived and died. It's not your heritage. Nirvana lasted longer than the Confederacy. My emo phase in the early 2000s lasted longer than the Confederacy. You're not proud of those 5 years of your great-great-great-great-grandfather's life. You like the white supremacy. Stop pretending it's something else. And then Twitter did what Twitter does. It's our heritage. Pokemon Go has lasted longer than the Confederacy did, and with 3 times the number of Americans behind it, you're lucky they only took the statues down instead of replacing them with Pikachus. I mean, come on, the bar is low. You only have to exist for 5 years and have a certain amount of backing to somehow be culturally relevant enough to get a statue, right? Because it's not like those statues are rooted in white supremacy, right? No, it's heritage. 5 years of heritage. 5 years. 4 years of war, 5 years of heritage. 150 years later. People are still clinging to that shit, like with their fingernails, like, ah! There's even an account solely tweeting about things that lasted longer than the Confederacy. It's literally a Twitter account called Things That Lasted Longer Than the Confederacy. Please, go give them a follow. Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition lasted longer than the Confederacy. Ooh. That's pretty sad. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, lasted longer than the Confederacy. Arena football has lasted longer than the Confederacy. Good Lord, Obama's time in office lasted longer than the Confederacy. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to take all these statues down and admit that they're not about heritage. They are indeed about hate. The hate of white supremacy, and reminding women and people of color that all the rights they have now are granted to them by a bunch of powerful old white people. And it's really time that every single one of these go down. If you want to go put them in a museum and call it, the museum to people who lost, I would be totally down with that. Maybe we could build a gigantic losers museum and we could put it in the lobby of Trump Tower. And then everybody could go hang out and have a smashing good time. But regardless of what you do with the statues, please get them out of the public squares and get them out from in front of all these government buildings. Because if you don't, I can assure you there are millions of U.S. citizens who are going to be more than happy to do it for you.